Well, I'm kind of proud that in my writings, I think I've developed a basically new account of beauty, and I want to throw it onto YouTube in the form of reading in the conclusion of my most recent book. I wonder if it'll be my last book, Beauty: A Quick Immersion, from Tibidabo Press in Barcelona. I think it's been published in English, Spanish, and Catalan. All right. I guess, so the way this gets framed up in my newish account, I have to also attribute the impetus to G.E. Moore, one of my favorite philosophers, radically underappreciated at this point, but still, I'm taking some credit too. It emerges from the inadequacy of an objectivist account of beauty and a subjectivist account of beauty and a cultural relativist account of beauty. All those, in my opinion, have insuperable objections. Right? The claim that beauty is merely in the eye of the beholder destroys the whole concept. And I mean, there can't be a purely subjective concept. Sorry. And read your Wittgenstein, I guess. And the objectivist stuff seems almost ridiculous. I mean, I guess I do my objections to those here. The cultural relativist bit of it, which does answer a lot of the objections that you might bring to bear on the claim that beauty is subjective or the claim that it's subjective, also doesn't seem to me adequate. For one thing, I don't think we have a very good grasp on what is and what is not a single culture, whether cultures have different standards. Sort of, yes, it's floating, it's liquid, they're in contact with one another. So, for example, I guess this is what I'm saying is wrong about cultural relativism. Take a concept like wabi-sabi from Japanese aesthetics, or coolness, itutu, from Yoruba aesthetics. These can be, as soon as you articulate them to someone who has the Western concept of beauty, they may just go like, what the fuck are you talking about? But they may, and in fact, millions of people have, gone like, oh yes, exactly, we appreciate that too. Now we've got a word for it. Right? There's something quite a bit more universal. You draw the relativist, like wabi-sabi. Wow, that's totally different than anything the Greeks had. Completely, it is. But you know what? We can understand it too. I mean, we bend it when it comes west. But cultures communicate with one another. We're not in little sealed cultural chambers. At any rate, so if you want to see those three positions, though, attacked one by one, I guess read this little book. But let me go for the conclusion, where I develop my own situational account of beauty. I mean, it's not a full theory of beauty. It's a theory of the location of beauty. It's not in the object. It's not in the subject. It's not in the culture. It's in the situation embedding those. All right. And I think, I haven't really run this through enough conferences and things like this, but I think this solves a lot of the philosophical problems about beauty. So that would be worthwhile. So, final thoughts. Beauty is real. From Beauty: A Quick Immersion. I'll finish by expressing some of my own opinions on these matters. Let me start by pointing out that forcing us to choose between the subjective, the objective, and the cultural traps us in a false choice. Not in the sense that it ignores other possibilities, but in the sense that various combinations of those three are possible. Perhaps all three, subject, object, and culture, are at play in every aesthetic experience. Perhaps we don't actually have to choose among these alternatives. In his book Principia Ethica, 1903, G.E. Moore observes that the beautiful has often been defined in terms of the effects. This is not a quote, actually. The beautiful has often been defined in terms of the effects it produces on our feelings, and hence as entirely subjective. Surely he's thinking of humankind, among others. But that's wrong, he proposes. Rather, quote, to assert that a thing is beautiful is to assert that the cognition of it is an essential element in an intrinsically valuable whole. To assert that a thing is beautiful is to assert that the cognition of it is an essential element in an intrinsically valuable whole. The question of whether it is truly beautiful or not depends upon the objective question. This is the quote continued. The question of whether it is truly beautiful or not depends upon the objective question of whether the whole is or is not truly good, and does not depend on the question whether it would or would not excite particular feelings in particular persons. It's a complicated thought. It's right, man. Really, really right. And truly original, I think. It's the whole situation, dude. That's the beautiful object. The whole, which Moore refers to, is not the object, not the beholder's pleasure, not the cultural vocabulary, but encompasses all of these. What is beautiful is the situation, embedding the object, the subject, the physical environment. For example, the light waves bouncing off the object, moving through the air and into my head through my eyes. And the socially generated equipment, including the vocabulary that the subject has on hand for articulating this experience to herself and to others. To say of an object that it is beautiful is to say that it takes up a certain sort of role in situations like that. We might call this the situational account of beauty. Recall from previous discussions, Suetsu Yanagi, the Japanese philosopher of craft. A beautiful artifact may be defined as one that reposes peacefully where it aspires to be. A beautiful object may be defined as one that reposes peacefully where it aspires to be. Or the concept of Hoso, the Diné or Navajo concept of beauty, also explored fairly elaborately, briefly though, in this brief book. Also in Six Names of Beauty, my other book about beauty. Beauty as a healthy and harmonious whole system in which people and things are co-implicated. It's not only what the thing intrinsically is, and not only the pleasure it yields in someone's head, but the place the object takes up in certain situations, how it's placed as well as what it is, the garden as well as the flower, the forest as well as the tree, the planet as well as the mountain. That is, what makes something beautiful is that it enters into situations of certain sorts, situations in the world encompassing things and social persons and the environments in which they are co-embedded. There's a real physical environment in which persons, objects are co-embedded. I don't want that to be controversial, but maybe it is. Though we often directly attribute beauty to particular things, roses, sunsets, paintings, meals, passages, people, these things are themselves relational or consist of their relations to other things. Yes, I do have a metaphysics underneath this of relation. A sunset may be experienced as a distinct scene, or even as if it were a painting, sort of. But you can't have sunsets without a solar system, and a sunset is distinguished from a sunrise, not directly by how it looks, but by how it's related to the day and the planet, what it's moving from and what it's moving to, even its westness as opposed to eastness, a purely relational matter. It's made as a vast collaboration between the star, the atmosphere, and the terrain. What is beautiful, I suggest, can be conceived as the whole consisting of four elements. And this is an example of the metaphysics that's developed pretty elaborately in Entanglements, a System of Philosophy. What is beautiful is the whole consisting of four elements: the object and its form, that is, the arrangement of its material; the subjective response, pleasure is awfully simplistic, I prefer longing; the cultural, conceptual, linguistic equipment that the experiencers have available, perhaps imprinted on their neurology; and the environing conditions that make the experience possible: the atmosphere, the light, the quiet or the noise, the desert around the tree of life. It's an image of that famous tree at the beginning of the chapter. Now, any given situation consisting of these four elements is bristlingly or even infinitely complex: object, person, environment, vocabulary. But it's also an entirely real thing in the world, these four-dimensional objects, embedding objects, experiencers, and concepts in beautiful situations. Calling beauty pleasure, or purporting to express its essence in a ratio, as like the golden section, are intolerable simplifications, like objective or subjective. But then again, saying, as I'm saying, it's really complex does not seem that satisfying. But what would you expect, really? The sunset is replete, defined in its relations, including its relation to perceivers and the ability to experience certain colors, for instance. We want to mark off the Mona Lisa in its frame as a distinct thing with clear bounds just sitting there to be appreciated. But our appreciation is filled with its relations, some knowledge of what it is made of, when it was made, by whom, the history of its veneration as a beautiful thing, the way it's lit and the way the light bathes the rest of the room, the crowd and the chatter and the hush. Without things such as these, the experience of the painting cannot exist at all. They are built into the act of seeing. If the experience is pleasurable, they are built into the pleasure. They make it into the pleasure it is, a pleasure of a distinct kind. The subjective objective cultural distinction jammed us into a false conceptuality. All three, every time, and also the real world situation of which subject, object, and culture are parts. I suppose that's my strategy for addressing these questions: having my lovely cake and eating it too. I will take the same approach with many, at least, of the theories and characterizations of beauty and related ideas that we have examined. No, we don't really have to choose among these, though they appear to be opposed. One thing that may have struck you about wabi-sabi aesthetics is that it is a concept that had no direct equivalent in the West until it was imported, and perhaps and certainly distorted in the process. A person walking around a bit of the world carrying the cluster of Japanese or Yoruba or South Asian or Western aesthetic concepts is noting aspects of things that a person without those concepts cannot notice in quite the same way. The public vocabulary encompassing even such words as pleasure, other languages might not group all the experiences that the West calls pleasures as being the same sort of thing. I hope they don't. For example, provides the resources by which we each articulate our experience to ourselves. This is true to a significant extent, even if, as so many thinkers have emphasized, rasa aesthetics, South Asian rasa aesthetics, emphasizes it relentlessly. For example, the experience of beauty is ultimately ineffable, or not fully expressible in any language. Cultural relativism cannot affirm beauty's ineffability, but the situational account can. For one element of the situation in which beauty occurs is the object itself, which is experienced as beautiful. The object, any object, sustains indefinitely many descriptions in different vocabularies and in different languages, aesthetic descriptions, for example, or scientific descriptions, or ordinary descriptions. It's big and yellow, for example. But no object is fully describable in any language, or even in them all, for each is uniquely itself. Each is Iwa. It's a Yoruba aesthetic concept, or synonym for beauty, translation of beauty. Maybe not, though. For that reason as well, we can remark that many or even all of the accounts of beauty that we've seen are plausible if they are not presented as exclusive and exhaustive as mapping the whole terrain. There are many different varieties of beauty. People in a certain mood or moment want their images idealized or generalized. These are theories of beauty. The statue as the essence of womanhood, or whatever. In another culture or in another mood, they want their art rough, improvised, free. In one, they love general truths, and in other, specific objects and their uniqueness. The reasons they do are immensely complex and perhaps lie outside aesthetics entirely. In the economic or political situation, for example, in the materials available and contingent contact with other cultures. But the only pressure to choose between the beauty of perfect unity and the beauty of integral parts, like the accounts of Plotinus versus Hutcheson, for example, assembled into a coherent whole, for example, the only pressure to choose between those, the classical and idealist conceptions, as I call them, is that each is presented as an overall account of beauty. They both, in my view, identify real dimensions of beauty, and that almost anyone could be brought to experience, or even that most people have in fact experienced. And the problem only arises when they say this and nothing else is what beauty is. That's kind of sad, actually, because it makes whole ranges of experiences more difficult or conceals more beauty than it reveals. The hope comes from the fact that experiences of beauty crystallized in these terms and definitions are communicable. They can be shared. Indeed, as Alexander Nahamas suggests, they typically are shared, these terms and standards of beauty. They bring us together as in communities of appreciation. In a world of instant communications, these experiences forge such connections not only across individuals, but across cultures. Learning what other cultures find beautiful and why, you might also learn that or how cultures are not fully distinct from one another. In many cases, we see that we already appreciate things in ways that are made explicit in the aesthetic standards of other cultures, a quality of simplicity or roughness, for example, or the way a particular person seems to be fully themselves, or somehow to express their own distinct essence, which I've associated with Yoruba aesthetics here. We can learn from other people and even from other languages how to say what we are already experiencing, though we should be alert for the distortions or sheer appropriations. Some radical political critiques of beauty on some occasions, as in moments in revolutionary Moism and Marxism, in feminism and post-colonialism, might repudiate the concept of beauty entirely, or argue with Laura Mulvey that the concept should be deleted, that it's irremediably polluted. Others have argued for beauty's reconstrual, to open up rather than entirely undermine the concept. Well, the concept was already open to the point where vacuity threatens. Another way to look at resistant beauties, and the one most compatible with where the critique has fetched up for the moment, is that they bring to our attention forms and dimensions of beauty that were already there. So this is going to entail that cultural relativism about beauty is not adequate. They show us beauties that already existed. It's not that black bodies were ugly when white culture treated them as though they were, or tried to persuade everyone that they were. The black body, or the vast variety of black bodies, for example, or women's bodies, oppressed groups, in these feminist and anti-racist critiques, were always beautiful. And this can be demonstrated, shown, expressed in a way that is at once a critique of dominant norms and a celebration of the antecedent reality, of the beauty of things that was ignored or erased. A positive moment in anti-racism and feminism is to show forth proudly the beauties that systems of power occluded, and to draw attention to the ways these systems falsified and distorted and ignored the beauty that was always there, or myriad beauties that were already everywhere. All the many colors, configurations, movement styles now circulating in a world in which people are communicating in every direction all at once. Now, taking this sort of approach, the situations in which beauty arises are perfectly real all the way around. Even if beauty were in the head, it would be real in the sense that our heads are real. Slap yourself if you don't believe me. I mean, that's general advice, really. Our languages are real too, a matter of real social practices and cultural conditions for picking things out and describing them. Such things are stamped on the neurology of each of us, but they ultimately consist of a series of interactions among us by which words and concepts circulate. And the things we find beautiful are real too, as well as definitely outside the head and the language. That rose is not an image in my mind. It's not a bundle of words, and no such bundle can exhaustively describe it. It is an inexhaustible or infinitely replete real thing out there with which we're interacting in an environment and which we might struggle to describe in a poem, for example. And finally, the situation in which we're both embedded, we and the rose, the air around us, the light, the other plants, the relative humidity, these are all real too. This environment has subjects embedded in it, but it is radically in excess to these subjects. It is all around and also inside them. So beauty is real because we're real, but not only that, each of us is, and all of us are, real in a world that is real, a world whose beauties we are perhaps only beginning to be able to say. That's the conclusion of Beauty, A Quick Immersion. And it's a kind of move toward a revived and reconstrued objective account of beauty, I guess, you know. It's definitely not just in the head, which is the saddest conclusion anybody ever reached about anything. All right. I don't know what I'll do after this, but something else philosophical someday, perhaps.